In 2006, the Swiss-Italian Bertarelli siblings sold a pharmaceutical company their great-grandfather had founded a century earlier for $8.5 billion. Their story begins in Rome in 1906 with Pietro Bertarelli. He was not a scientist, but was a capable organizer with an eye for commercial opportunity and the wisdom to partner with someone who could provide what he lacked. That partner was Professor Cesare Serono, a biochemist with strong academic credentials and a working knowledge of hormone-based medicine, which at the time was an emerging and poorly understood frontier. Together, they founded a small laboratory called the Istituto Farmacologico Serono. The early operation was modest, hormone-based compounds derived from animal tissues, at a time when few commercial laboratories were pursuing that science seriously. For the first few decades, Serono grew steadily but without dramatic acceleration. The family maintained control, building the enterprise through careful reinvestment rather than outside capital. Wars, economic instability, and the structural limitations of the Italian pharmaceutical market all constrained growth, but none of them broke the company. The real inflection point came in the post-war period, when the second generation of Bertarellis took a calculated risk that would define the company for the rest of its existence. Serono's researchers made significant advances in the purification and commercial production of gonadotropins, hormones critical to human reproduction. In practical terms, this meant that Serono was positioning itself at the center of fertility medicine, a field that was about to become enormously consequential. Through the 1950s and 1960s, Serono developed what became known as Pergonal, one of the first commercially viable fertility drugs in the world, derived from the urine of postmenopausal women collected in large volumes across Italy. The logistics of that collection process were themselves an organizational achievement. Serono built a supply chain unlike anything the pharmaceutical industry had attempted at scale before. The drug worked, and couples across Europe, and then the United States who had been unable to conceive began having children because of it. This gave the company a moral and commercial foundation that sustained it through decades of change. The move of the company's headquarters to Geneva in the 1970s reflected a strategic calculus. Switzerland offered political stability, a favorable regulatory environment, and access to European capital markets in a way that Rome did not. The decision signaled the building of a generational institution. By the time Fabio Bertarelli, Pietro's grandson, and the third-generation steward of the family enterprise, took full leadership of Serono, the company had accumulated serious scientific credibility, a profitable core business in fertility treatments, and a global commercial presence. Fabio was not a scientist, but he was a disciplined manager and a firm believer in research investment. Under his leadership, Serono expanded its pipeline beyond fertility into neurology and endocrinology, developing treatments for multiple sclerosis, growth hormone deficiency, and other conditions where hormone-based medicine had therapeutic relevance. Serono remained relatively independent and research-driven, which cost more in the short term and paid off significantly over the long one. But Fabio Bertarelli's tenure also contained the seeds of something more complicated. As the company grew, expanding into the United States, Japan, and Latin America, the governance structures required became more sophisticated than what a traditional family business arrangement could easily sustain. Fabio ran Serono with considerable authority, and his children would eventually inherit both the business and the tensions that came with it. Ernesto Bertarelli, born in 1965, was the son who would ultimately steer the company to its most transformative moment, and then away from it entirely. He studied business at Harvard Business School, giving him a formal grounding in management theory that his predecessors had largely acquired through experience alone. What distinguished Ernesto was his willingness to professionalize the company while still maintaining family control. When Ernesto became CEO in the mid-1990s, Serono was already substantial. His task was to transform it into something world-class. He invested heavily in research collaborations, particularly in the area of multiple sclerosis, where Rebif, Serono's version of interferon beta 1A, was competing directly with more established American products. The commercial battle for the MS market was hard-fought and technically complex, and Serono's ability to compete in it spoke to the depth of scientific capability the family had built over generations. By the early 2000s, Serono was the third-largest biotechnology company in the world. It employed thousands of people across multiple continents, generated billions in revenue, and held an impressive portfolio of biologic drugs. But Ernesto was also navigating headwinds. The biotechnology industry was consolidating rapidly. Large pharmaceutical firms were acquiring biotech assets aggressively, and the capital requirements for remaining competitive in drug development were escalating faster than any private family enterprise could comfortably absorb. At the same time, a significant legal problem emerged in the United States, where Serono paid over $700 million to settle federal charges related to improper marketing of its growth hormone product, Serono. That settlement was one of the largest in pharmaceutical history at the time and represented a serious reputational and financial blow. The combination of competitive pressure, rising capital requirements, and the legal settlement shifted Ernesto's calculus. In 2006, the family sold its controlling stake in Serono to Merck KGaA, the German pharmaceutical company, for approximately $8.6 billion. It was one of the largest pharmaceutical transactions in European history. Ernesto has spoken about the decision to sell in terms of timing and optionality, the belief that the moment was right, that the price was fair, and that holding on would have required taking on risks that were not consistent with the family's long-term interests. After the sale, the family's wealth needed a new institutional home. Ernesto established Biotech, a private asset management firm that serves as the primary vehicle for the family's investment portfolio. Biotech operates across private equity, venture capital, and life sciences. It is not a passive holding company. It takes active positions, provides operational input to portfolio companies, and maintains the Bertarelli conviction that sector expertise is a durable competitive advantage. Ernesto's sister, Donna Bertarelli, inherited an equal share of the family fortune and has pursued a markedly different public profile. Her primary public role has been through the Bertarelli Foundation, which the family established in 1998, 8 years before the Serono sale. The foundation has concentrated its resources in translational neuroscience, rare cancer research, and marine conservation. Donna has become one of the more prominent advocates for large-scale ocean protection in the world, operating through a network of partnerships with governments, international organizations, and scientific institutions. Her work on marine protected areas has contributed to policy conversations at the United Nations level, where she serves as a special advisor. Another initiative of the siblings is sailing. Ernesto's sailing team, Alinghi, became the first European syndicate to win the America's Cup in 2003 and defended the title in 2007. A project that was as much about organizational discipline and competitive identity as it was about sport. He built the program from the ground up, recruiting world-class talent and investing in naval architecture against entrenched American and Australian establishments that had dominated the event for over a century. The Alinghi chapter revealed the same traits that had defined Serono at its best: a preference for building over buying and comfort with high-profile competition. Today, the Bertarelli family is in a consolidation and extension phase, not a dramatic growth phase. The enormous capital from the Serono sale has been deployed carefully. Biotech continues to operate as a serious investment platform. The philanthropic work is ongoing and substantive. The next generation of Bertarellis is largely private, and little is publicly known about whether they are being groomed for specific roles or allowed to pursue independent paths. One of the persistent challenges for families in the Bertarelli position is the transition from operators to investors. Running a pharmaceutical company is a fundamentally different activity from managing a diversified investment portfolio, even a sophisticated one. The operational instincts, the culture of scientific investment, the tolerance for long development timelines, these traits can be assets in private equity and venture investing, but they don't automatically translate. Biotech's results over time will determine whether the family has managed that transition successfully. Across a century of business history, the Bertarellis did a few things consistently well. They bet on science when it was genuinely hard to execute. They held control long enough to capture the full value of what they built, and when they sold, they did so at the right moment and with enough capital to build durable institutions on the other side. What comes next, whether Biotech compounds into something as consequential as Serono, and whether the next generation maintains cohesion, remains an open question. The dynasty is intact, but the work continues.